So again, welcome everybody. This is our Christmas bird count webinar. I wanted to officially welcome everybody. I have some more people coming in on the waiting list, so we'll be getting people trickling in here over the next few minutes. But again, welcome. And I wanted to thank Tim Nowicki. He is our presenter today, and he's going to be talking about the Christmas bird count, the history of it, and then some of the birds that we're frequently seeing during the Christmas bird count. So.
Well, thank you very much, Brittany. Good afternoon, everyone. One of the things that I've been involved with for many years is the Christmas bird count. In fact, my very first bird count that I participated in was 1966. I was paired with a fellow named Sergei Postupalski, who was at that time doing some research on osprey and bald eagle populations that were in jeopardy during those years. And so for the last 36 years, I have been compiler of the Christmas bird count. And I've participated in 46 bird counts total. So throughout the years, I have looked at some of the information and data that has been collected from the volunteers that go out each year and count birds, putting all this information together. So I thought I'd like to share some of that with you and give you a little brief history of what the Christmas count is really like. The Christmas count is a long-standing event that started actually back in 1900. A fellow named Frank Chapman from the American Museum of Natural History got wind of a Christmas period tradition that was being held in some parts of the country, where competing teams would actually go out and kill as many birds as they could, not necessarily for food, but I think more for the competition of who could kill the most. And this was the period of time in the late 1800s when there were no regulations at the time for killing. Well, once he got wind of this, he said that, you know, this is not very humane, this is not very helpful for our wildlife, and decided to initiate an event during the Christmas season, instead of killing, but counting. And so he sent out information to various organizations and people that he was involved with. And in 1900, that very first count, there were 27 groups that submitted data covering a total of 90 different species. And that was the initiation of the count that we know of as the Christmas count. But in 1918, people began to realize that Frank Chapman had a pretty good idea that killing birds wantonly was not a very good idea. And the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was initiated to prevent that kind of unlawful take of wildlife, especially songbirds and non-game birds. Unfortunately, it came a little bit too late for the passenger pigeon, that the last one of which died in 1914 in the Cincinnati Zoo, but it certainly was helpful for subsequent species of birds. There we go. Now, those early counts of the Christmas count were just sort of lackadaisical and sort of casual and very informal. People in different parts of the country wanted to help, and so they would select an area that they enjoyed or maybe was close at hand to them, and went out for a period of time and counted the birds. Counting the species and total number of individuals has always been part of the process, and a very important part, because it begins to provide a baseline of information and data in which people can use for future reference and for comparison. And they would be out for various periods of time. In the Detroit area, looking back on some of the records, one of the first counters was a fellow named Alexander Blaine. And he was actually up in the Waterford area and submitted data to the museum about observations of the 15 species and 101 individuals that he counted up there. Subsequently, various other groups and people became involved. There were people that were counting birds along the Belle Isle area and in different areas of the Detroit River and inland as well. So people really caught on with this counting of birds tradition versus the killing of birds tradition. Throughout the years that we have been involved, that I have been involved with the Christmas count, it's just remarkable how dedicated some volunteers are. There's a fellow, Richard Jensen, who was involved with the Christmas count for 45 years. Chris Hull, who, although he's up in Lansing, he has been involved with the count down here for 41 years. And I think one of the really remarkable stories is Ken Michaels. He's been involved for 37 years. During that time, his sons participated in the count pretty regularly. And of course, his sons have gotten older and they have children. And so now you see the little fellow down there in the corner. He's out with his son, with his grandparents and father, counting birds early in the morning, because Ken and his sons would go out and count owls and be out fairly late into the evening also. But I think it's an example of how Frank Chapman's idea of creating a new tradition has in fact remained a tradition for many years and has involved various generations to go along with that tradition. Now, because the Christmas count has now aged quite nicely, and many organizations and groups have realized the benefit of it, and the popularity of birding, of course, has just exploded. The amount of information, the various areas has expanded a great deal. And the National Audubon Society used to collect the data, but now has collaborated with the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, and they have this tremendous database that has been accumulated, so that now when you submit data as a compiler, what I do is it goes to Cornell, and it was reviewed by a state reviewer, and then it's added into the database. They have done a tremendous job on helping people learn about birds, collecting this data from eBird observations. And this information, especially over the long period of time that this count has been conducted, helps people learn about increases or decreases in population trends. There's an expansion of the ranges. We'll talk about both increases and decreases and range expansions, just like we have here in the Detroit area. And there are a number of other publications that Christmas count data is being used for in the scientific community. And I think one of the neatest things about this Christmas bird count is that it is voluntary. There is no other organization as longest running collecting data as the Christmas bird count. It's tremendous because scientists could never be able to go out into the field in all of these various areas around the United States and various parts of the world, collecting data in maybe a more formal manner, but there's no way you could duplicate the number of hours that are put in counting birds that the Christmas bird count represents. So back to the Christmas count in the Detroit area, our count started in the 15-mile diameter circle regime, which was standardized, I believe, in about 1945. That made it a little bit more comfortable for scientists, standardizing the area coverage and at least a minimum of 8 hours for sure, so that when scientists began to look at what information was provided, they could rely on it a little bit more and use it a little bit more precisely and accurately. So about 1945 is when a 15-mile diameter circle was established for all Christmas counts. Ours started about 14-mile in Lasher. I know I remember that people at the Cranbrook Institute, Walter P. Nickel, was involved a great deal with compiling, orchestrating the Christmas bird count. And that lasted until about 1953, when the center was located up to Middle Belt and Orchard Lake roads. Then ultimately, after a fairly short period of time, it was moved to Ormond and Big Lake Road in the northwestern quadrant of Oakland County, where it is currently located. And since 1958, we have been counting birds in that particular area. And one of the benefits of counting over long periods of time is we can begin to see trends, as we mentioned earlier. We also begin to see changes in the habitats and the environments. When they first established the 1958 circle up in northwestern Oakland County, they began to, well, they had to establish some kind of a habitat description. So I don't know exactly how they estimated it, but back in those days, farm and pasture land was estimated at 47%. And deciduous woods, 23%. Rivers and lakes, you can see, is 5%, and suburban village was about 5%. Well, recently I looked at some aerial photographs provided by Oakland County Planning, and I looked at least the open land, old farms, fallow fields from haying and pastures and things of that sort, and looked at our Christmas count area. Some of those sections have lost 90, 93, 94% of that open land. What I used to see in some of my areas in my section were some dairy farms. They have now since gone by the wayside, and it's not necessarily open land anymore. It's oftentimes developed into homes and subdivisions. So that loss of habitat, the easiest for development, flat open land, is definitely going to have some impact on the population of birds, and particular certain species of birds. Right now, because of the popularity of birding, there are many different circles that have been developed just in southeastern Michigan. There are several different counts in the state, and we have about 9 circles that are surrounding the Detroit area, providing very good coverage. We've got northern Oakland County between the Detroit count and the Oakland count. We got that northern tier covered. Ann Arbor has a very good circle in Washtenaw County. Monroe and Rockwood are covering the Detroit River and Lake Erie areas. And it's a nice mix of kind of inland and water because of our association with the Great Lakes. And if you look at the nationwide, right now, there are over 2,459 counts that submit data to Cornell's laboratory. And there are, I think I remember, over 73,000 participants that conduct those counts. In Michigan, we've got 158 species that were identified. Nationwide, we've gotten 664 that spend time in the winter in the United States. Now, that's the kind of information that ultimately is very helpful for scientists when they start looking at different populations. One of the earlier publications that was using Christmas count data was produced by Terry Root from the University of Michigan at the time. And in this book, she took Christmas count data that was submitted and was able to generate maps of the United States. You can see them, and produced contours showing the concentration of different species of birds so that we could get an idea of where those birds were concentrating. So the Christmas count data that we are providing helped her to be able to establish those circles and or those concentrations. In addition to that, she was able to create overlays that you could correlate with things like temperature, rainfall or snowfall, and different factors of habitat. And that is something that scientists are using to begin to establish changes or why changes in our populations are occurring. Currently, in our Detroit count, we have about 18 core species. They've been seen every year since 1958. And there may be various numbers, obviously populations and people out in the field are looking in different ways, but you know, they go up and down. But generally, those 18 species are seen every year. In the count total, since 1945, we have seen 136 different species. But, oh, now I should correct that because it's now 137. This year, we added the peregrine falcon. Chris Hall up near the Holly section of our circle had a marvelous opportunity to take video of this juvenile peregrine eating a mourning dove in the tree. And this was a brand new species for us, but maybe a sign of the success of the peregrine falcon introductory program that was started many years ago. On the average, the Detroit count sees about 54 different species. That varies, of course, from year to year. We've had a high of 78 and we've had a low of 42. But on the average through those years, we about 54. The average number of individuals is about 8,300. It's a little bit more, but it's about 8,300. And through the years, the composition of those 8,300 has changed a little bit. In the earlier years, waterfowl was reasonable, but a low percentage. Of recent, the waterfowl percentage has now increased to about 25% of the individuals counted versus the passerine birds, or a core number of some of those passerine birds. And that resulted in this increase that you can see, albeit slight, but when you look at the trend line, that black line over the bars, it indicates that there has been a general increase in the number of individuals counted. Now, species-wise, if you look at the number of species, because of the increase in the changes over time, you'll see that there's a slight increase for that also. And I think some of that is due to waterfowl. We see new species of waterfowl, but there are other species that are also involved with that increase. And that's the beauty of counting a similar area over a long period of time, as you can begin to see some of these different introductions, expansions, especially if you look at circles all over the state and the country. So we have an increase in species, and some of that can be shown in looking at new species that we have identified in recent years. The wild turkey, a marvelous success for the state. When they introduced the correct subspecies for the state, their numbers exploded. And though the number of wild turkeys in the state were expanding far earlier than 1997, they finally reached the Detroit count about 1997. And the nice thing is that they have continued to be a regular species counted in reasonable numbers in the Detroit count circle. So that's one factor that helps increase the number of species that we are now seeing over the years. The pileated woodpecker is another example. The first one was seen in 1989, but we have begun to see the pileated woodpecker on a regular basis in our Christmas counts. One of in fact, I'm pretty sure, I haven't looked at it exactly, but we saw 16 different pileated woodpeckers this particular count. And I'm pretty sure that is an all-time high. I personally actually saw 5 total when I was out in December last year. I saw 2 pair and 1 single. So their numbers are expanding. And I did a little analysis last year because my thought is that for many years, the pileated woodpecker was seen at Indian Springs, but not too many had been seen in other locations nearby. Well, it turns out that when I looked at Christmas count data, it suggested anyhow that the Indian Springs section of our Christmas count was sort of like the nursery, and subsequent sightings of pileated woodpecker were in some of the surrounding adjacent sections, suggesting that the Indian Springs was the nursery, and then it has expanded outward from there. Sandhill cranes are another success story. Back in 1999, we saw our very first sandhill crane, and they have become, again, a pretty consistent species that has been counted on our Christmas count. Chris Hall up in the Holly area has a really nice evening roost that he regularly hits now, and is able to contribute a fair number of sandhill cranes to our count. But it reflects, the breeding population that is in the in Michigan also. I guess the same thing is also true with the eastern bluebird. Back in the 1980s, when the bluebird trail was very popular, more people were putting out bluebird boxes. A greater number of bluebirds were being raised, and of those population of breeding birds in the state, there's always this percentage that will stay over the winter, and we have been consistently seeing pretty fair numbers of bluebirds spending the winter as well since those mid-1980s. One of the species that has increased our species count also is the house finch. And this particular bird was never seen in the eastern part of the United States. The story behind this is that back in the 1940s, some unscrupulous pet dealers captured the house finches that were at that time only found west of the Rockies. They captured these birds, sent them to New York, New Jersey, and they were then being sold to the public as California finches. Well, this was illegal, and before the authorities could confiscate those birds, the pet owners released them into the area so they wouldn't get fined. Well, they were able to establish themselves in the New Jersey, New York area, and subsequent to those 1940 era, they have moved westward. And you can see from the graph that in 1984, when we saw our very first house finch, one of those nice studies that the Christmas count was able to document how their movement reached our area. And subsequent to this, they have actually moved westward and have now reached their western historical population west of the Rockies. And again, Christmas counts have documented that movement across the United States. Another observation that our Christmas count has made that reflects the national population also is the mallard and black duck relationship. As you can see from the graph, back in the early days, mallard and black duck populations were, fairly neck and neck and pretty similar. But then, I don't know the reason why exactly, but the mallard population really exploded. And the black duck has always remained in the shadows of the mallard population. So we see now mallards quite regularly. In fact, I think they are in the top 5 of the bird individuals species counted right at this time. So it's interesting how I think that our little isolated 15-mile diameter circle in many cases reflects the national trend. Same thing happened with the ringneck pheasant. Our population counts back early on were quite high, but something caused the population of pheasants, ringneck pheasants, to decline, and it was about the same time as national populations declined as well. Now, one of the things that happens is that if you have a change in habitat and over time, you can begin to see the possible effects of that. When I mentioned the fact that the pasture and field areas that were estimated in 1958 for our circle were 47%, and recently analyzed the loss of that kind of habitat in our section, you can see why possibly, I mean, I haven't proved this, but certainly the trend line for the tree sparrow, which uses that kind of habitat, has declined remarkably. It used to be, the tree sparrow used to be the second or third most popular counted bird next to the house sparrow and the starling for probably 3 or 4 decades into the count history. Well, right now it's down considerably. It's in 13th or 14th place as opposed to second place back in historical times. So somebody would hopefully be able to do a little bit more scientific study to determine the exact reason, but I'm pretty sure the loss of habitat in our area has a significant impact. However, when some habitats are lost, there may be some gains. A lot of that habitat of the open fields was easily developed for subdivisions and homes. And a lot of them are putting up bird feeders. And have to put in a little plug here. During the Christmas count season, I wish more people would fill their bird feeders so that we could have a little better counting of some of these birds. But I wouldn't be very surprised if the fact that we have the bird feeders in some of these suburban areas and that has allowed birds like the tufted titmouse to increase in numbers. And I think we'll see the same thing is happening with the black-capped chickadee. If you put out a bird feeder, they are one of the first species to find your bird feeder. And their curiosity, their boldness, I think is reflected in the fact that, yeah, hey, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go check that out. But you can see in the numbers also that the chickadees have increased remarkably. So they are a real trooper in those records from the Christmas count. But again, there's always gives and takes. Nationwide, there has been an increase in Cooper's hawks that have been seen during the Christmas count also. And the Cooper's hawk is one of those bird feeders at your bird feeder. They seem to have recognized the fact that concentrating birds in backyards and feeders, little buffets sort of like, is a pretty worthwhile habitat to explore and exploit. So a lot of people now see dead birds, or at least remains of birds in their yard. Please don't get discouraged. This is a natural phenomenon. And although you may see the hawk come through your yard once in a while, they don't stay for any length of time. I think they realize that birds become conditioned to the fact that if there's a predator around all the time, they don't spend as much time unprotected as they would. So if they come through the hawk, that is, periodically, they have probably a better chance of scoring a kill. But it's a natural phenomenon, and if you enjoy watching birds, please continue to feed those birds. So moving forward, this Christmas count is certainly going to be, I think, a phenomenon that will continue because of the benefits that it is providing. It is helping science, and it is providing, again, at least some foundation and some base information about bird populations. And in combination with other tools, like we had the breeding bird survey that Chandler started many years ago. If you use that in combination with Christmas count data and some other efforts that are nationwide, certainly eBird, that is a tool that can be used. And so I think the people that participate in a Christmas bird count should pat themselves on the back. They are spending one day of their birding possibilities using their home skills that they have developed over time, and putting those skills to use for science, which is benefiting our understanding of bird populations and hopefully providing information that will result in anything that can help us learn and affect those changes. So if you are inspired and would like to take the time during the Christmas season. Now, the Christmas count, let's not get it confused, is not just on Christmas Day. There's about a 10-day period before Christmas Day and about a 10-day period after Christmas Day that one can participate in the counts within your area. You have to check the date for the particular counts in your area. And they vary depending on each leader and the availability of the people. So there's a web page for the Detroit Audubon that sponsors 2 Christmas counts. And if you feel like you would like to participate, certainly near the Christmas season, get in touch with the Detroit Audubon and see if you would be available on the dates. So thank you for your time, and maybe we've got some questions. Brittany?
Hi, Tim. Yeah, so if I did have one question that got posed earlier, and that was, what areas can you find the pileated woodpecker?
Well, you and I were talking about that a little bit earlier. They have expanded their range around southeastern Michigan significantly. I've seen them at Proud Lake Recreation Area, as I mentioned, our 15-mile diameter in northwestern Oakland County. We had 16 this year. Some of them are seen in small woodlots. Certainly if you go to places like Highland Lake Recreation Area, you might have a chance of seeing them. It's pretty hard for me to say exactly, pinpointing a spot on a hill in a park where you would see them. But your chances, if you get out in the field more frequently, of seeing them are much, much greater these days.
So another, it's not necessarily a question, more of a statement. I want to thank Kathleen for mentioning it. So the Christmas bird count is indeed what you would call a citizen science opportunity. And so we do have one coming up in February, which is in a similar way. It's a great way that people that of any experience level can participate. And so it is called the Great Backyard Bird Count. And again, you can find that out through, in the chat section, you'll see gbbc.org, or we do have information on our webpage for Detroit Audubon as well. So thank you for mentioning that, because yeah, there are various citizen science opportunities that people can participate in throughout the year.
Yeah.
She wanted to also say thank you, Tim. Very detailed presentation with cool facts.
Thank you.
Carolyn, we have the Pileated Woodpeckers, I'm assuming that's what you're referring to, in Grant, Michigan, on the west side of the state. That's cool. And then hello from Windsor from Sarah. She says, my husband and I are new to birding. What would you recommend for how to get started in the bird count? Any tools, places to look? So Sarah, I'll start off with mentioning we have information through the Detroit Audubon webpage. Most of the time you can also do Google searches, but Tim, did you want to go into that a little bit further about some of the tools they might need, maybe some resources, pages that might have helped, maybe leaders depending on what location people are in? She says she's from the Windsor area. So yeah, do you have any information for her?
Well, one of the things that nature centers do is they provide a lot of very valuable, very helpful, very professional information about the natural world. And many nature centers in the area typically have bird programs that deal with identification. And that would be one way of learning about birds and getting into that community. As you mentioned, the Detroit Audubon has a variety of field trips that provide expert help. People are always willing to share, I think, what they learn about birds, because it's so exciting. It's neat to see new people experience a bird for the first time. And I think as a teacher, that is always exhilarating. One of the things that you'll need is a reasonable pair of binoculars. If you have not got a pair of binoculars in the last 50 years, I would recommend that you explore buying a good pair of binoculars. Something like an 8x42 is a very, very versatile kind of binocular. It's 8 power with a outside lens of 42 millimeters or in diameter. And there's some very good products out there for a modest amount of money. If you want a good pair, you're going to have to spend maybe $200 to $300, but there are other pairs that you could get for less and other pairs that you could get for a heck of a lot more also, but they really aren't that much better than those that are in the $200 to $300 range. I'll probably get some comments on that, but you can get a really good pair of binoculars for a reasonable, modest amount of money. So that helps you see the birds. The other thing is that you'll want to know what you're looking at. And so there are many field guides that are on the market. I mean, we're flooded with those kinds of things. You would want to decide whether you want a field guide that has photographs or paintings. And that's one of the basic differences that I always recommend people consider. And one of the things I think as a beginner, I would suggest that you get a field guide that is limited to the eastern part of the United States. If you get one that's involved with the entire United States, yeah, you may get more birds for your book, but it maybe makes it a little bit more difficult to distinguish between whether you're looking at this bird from the eastern part of the United States or whether you might be confusing it with a bird that's typically seen only in the western part of the United States. And as a beginner, I think you probably want to limit your choices. So a field guide is something you'll have to decide whether you want photographs or paintings. I grew up with Roger Torrey Peterson's field guide, and I feel very comfortable with that one. I like the size of the paintings. The paintings are very accurate. It has range maps these days that are right on the same page, so that you can see whether it's more of a southern bird of the eastern US or it is within the range that you are birding in. So it's one of the books that I feel very comfortable with, but there are many that are on the market. Binoculars, field guide, a good disposition, probably a good pair of shoes when you're out in the field. Wear something appropriate. Too often when I was in the field with people, they would wear inappropriate foot gear and then complain about the trail. If you just wear the right kind of foot gear, you don't have to worry about that part. So be a little practical also.
Yeah, and kind of like what Tim was saying, so here at Detroit Audubon, we usually have technically two types of Christmas bird counts that we conduct, and one of which is open for open registration, and so people are always welcome to join in. The other is more private, so that's more limited in the numbers, but you are always welcome to join us on the one that usually Jim Bull leads. And so if you're ever curious around that time frame and you're wanting to learn more about how you can participate, what you might need, you can always reach out to us and we can help direct you on what you would need. The other thing is, say at the time you can't afford to buy some binoculars. If you attend our program, we usually have binoculars that you can borrow. And so
Great.
it's at least something that you can use as an option until you have the chance to buy some of your own.
I noticed a comment from Kathleen, which was a great suggestion, is that most everybody has a cell phone these days. And so the cell phone is another way of identifying birds, with the, Merlin from the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology. And then they have the adjunct that if you point the phone at the bird singing, it'll tell you what bird is singing. Not all species, but many species. And I tried it this summer. It works pretty well. Yeah.
Another question we did have was by Jill. She was asking about the peregrine falcon. So Jill, did you want to ask that question?
Sure. I was laughing, Tim, because I was wondering if you were referring to Travis for the shoe, the gear and the shoe problem.
Well, it was a general statement, not directed.
I can attest to the fact that it can get very cold for the 8 hours of the Detroit Christmas bird count. So gear is very important.
Make sure you wear boots.
I guess my question is looking at our map, and I know I've done the Christmas bird count with you. I was wondering about the Royal Oak area and the peregrine falcons at the zoo. Is that not in our map for the Detroit Christmas bird count? Do we miss that?
Well, it's not in our circle, the Northwestern Oakland County. Brittany, is that in your section at all?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think it extended quite that far. So I'm afraid that those peregrines are kind of in limbo.
I mean, those are a pretty standard place to get peregrines in Oakland County daily. So I was just curious.
Yeah.
I guess a similar question that I would have would be, because right now we have 9 circles in the Detroit metro and surrounding area. Would you say that there is any way, because there are some emptier spots, would it ever be possible to expand into those areas, or do you just think that there wouldn't be enough scene to really conduct a circle there?
Well, I know some counts have started recently. I think the Heartland count is a relative recent addition. So they sort of helped fill in a gap there. But it would all depend on whether people wanted to expand out from the city areas even further. We've seen that to the best efforts of the Detroit organizing people back in 1958, looking at the current circle, I have a feeling they thought, they were going into some rural areas, but as suburban and development expands, it has infringed on that circle remarkably. So maybe somebody would want to start a circle even further where maybe it would remain more rural over time.
So this is in the comment section, someone was asking if we could see the map. And so I pulled it up so that way people could kind of see what we were referring to. So we have areas that currently are being covered, but there are some empty gaps kind of in between some of them. Not to say that there wouldn't be possibilities.
Yeah, you can't overlap circles. So you would have to position it so that there was no overlap.
Yeah, could maybe be one around West Bloomfield, but then you would probably miss out on a circle over in Northville because there might be some overlap. But yeah, there might be a possibility to add maybe one or two more circles, but.
Well, that's a lot of urban area. It's
yeah.
Yeah.
And there is a link to the actual map. So this is just a screenshot of the map. So there is a link if you want to see the map in more detail in the comments section. So you are more than welcome to join in on that. So.
Do we have some other questions or?
At the moment, I don't see any others. Does anyone else have any questions that you would like for Tim to answer? If not.
Well, one of the things it just came to mind is that, we sometimes associate the robin with the harbinger of spring. But when you start looking at our Christmas count data, at least for our circle, the robin has been seen a remarkable number of times on our Christmas count. From memory, it's probably like 85% of the counts we have seen robins. And we saw quite a few this year. And I think I remember historically, there was a count from the Detroit River count that I believe extends into part of Dearborn, where they saw like 600 or so robins around the Ford test track. And they had planted these ornamental flowering crabs around it. And they were just gorging on the berries that were still on the branches. So just kind of interesting to see how some of these birds that we sometimes associate with only summertime are actually around in the wintertime. And the song sparrow is another good example. One of the species we think of as summer actually around a significant number of times, almost 100% of the time in the winter.
So Kathy mentioned that she does have lots of robins in her yard right now in Grosse Pointe Woods. There was a question. So Scott posed a question that is kind of intriguing, and I don't know if it's ever been discussed, but has there ever been thought of a 4th of July count to get the summer populations?
Well, see, that's where the federal government, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service sponsors the Breeding Bird Survey. They have a program where they have identified different routes. I forgot if it was 10, 15 miles or whatever, that they have counters go along this route, stopping every half a mile for, I believe, 3 minutes or something like that, counting and observing by sound or sight all the birds that they can see or hear at that location. And those have been established for quite a few years, and they are one of the long-standing surveys to help survey birds in that summertime breeding period.
So another question was, what area was the peregrine falcon seen in North Oakland County that isn't in our count? You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, it was in the Holly area. I don't know the exact intersection.
So this next question is probably either, I don't know if Tim you'd be able to answer it or if our pre-search coordinator behind me would be able to answer it, but she was saying, I was wondering why Detroit Audubon is counting birds in Ann Arbor because they have their own Christmas bird count. So my first thought, and again, feel free to input if I'm incorrect, is the Detroit area is full on volunteers, and so they need volunteers in other areas, and that's, I believe, why we are helping in that area. But
That sounds great. And
Okay.
yeah.
so
Well, hopefully, if people want to participate, they can do some exploring and contact some of these other circles, because you're right, some places do need some help.
yeah. The other related question was, why do we count birds in Canada? So I think it's just that the circle, because for us to be able to get all of Detroit Metro in the circle, it has to overlap into Canada. Not that I think we necessarily actually count in Canada, but again, Tim, is that
We did actually.
okay, so never mind, we do actually count in Canada. And so that poses a question, why do we count the birds in Canada?
Well, I think the idea is that we have established circles and we want to count the birds. Actually, Canada, some places in Latin America, and some Pacific islands are actually submitting data to Cornell with their Christmas count information. So as long as the circles don't overlap, I don't think it makes that much difference whether it's in Canada. The idea is the 15-mile diameter circle, and you want to count the birds.
So Mackenzie is the last name. But yeah, there was a question about, she says, I live in Harper Woods. Recently had a Muscovy duck land on my lawn. I would like to participate, but is there a circle for this area?
Well, unless your circle hits that, I don't think there is. And I don't think we have a category for domestic animals. You know, we don't count chickens that are in barnyards, and the Muscovy duck is really kind of a domestic thing. I guess I'd have to double check on that, but I don't think we add those to the count.
The other option that you can always consider, and it's great to participate with these citizen science programs, but another option would be to register and record what species you see in eBird. And so that's another resource that people will frequently go and use to see what birds have been seen and where. And so even if you can't necessarily participate in any of our citizen science programs, you can always submit what you see in eBird. And pictures are always better. Especially if it's a bird you don't expect to see in an area. Picture is good because that way it can be with 100% certainty that that is what is seen. If you don't have a picture, sometimes the people that are analyzing the information in eBird may not be as likely to believe that that was seen unless there's a picture associated with it.
And you know, a compliment to that is that I have tried taking a picture with my cell phone through the binoculars. And with a little bit of manipulation, it actually turns out pretty good. So if you don't necessarily have, you know, a long telephoto lens, try using your cell phone camera and binocs to get a better picture.
Yeah, I've done similar things. I remember years ago during the solar eclipse, I took a picture of the solar eclipse through the little cover things you used for your glasses to be able to see it and while directly looking at it. And so in a similar way, yeah, you can do that. Another question which is posed by Dawn is there any collaboration between Audubon clubs? Yes. So we have one coming up with the Washtenaw Audubon Club that is later this kind of like late winter, early spring, and it's going to be on trumpeter swans in Ann Arbor. And so that'll be a really fun one I'm excited for. We haven't fully started advertising it, but that is one that's in the works. We are, and this is more of a hush-hush. We haven't fully advertised it, and there's a lot of details still needing to be discussed, but we are hoping to do a Birds, Bikes, and Brews special program up in Traverse City with the Traverse City Audubon Club, as well as a biking organization. So that way we can do a biking, wine, and brewery tour as we go birding. And so again, we haven't even advertised that fully even in A capacity because that's still just barely in the works.
Well, participants may see twice as many birds as they actually do with that program.
Yes, that's very true. But yes, we are working to try and build some more partnerships with some local Audubon organizations, just because we're all doing the same types of work, and we definitely want to try and interwork as much as we can. But yeah. Awesome. Yeah, as of right now, there are no further questions. Does anyone want to chime in? Oh, here's one. By Don, what kind of camera is used by the speaker or others in this group? My phone cannot get close enough. I have a Canon that has removable lenses, so there are a variety of different types of cameras you can get. I used to have a Canon, I think it was a Nikon, or a camera that was called a Nikon, and it was a really nice one to have if you don't want to spend nearly as much for removable lenses. So what it was is it didn't have removable lenses at all, but it had a wider range of picture capability. It was about 500, but at the time, but I think now they're selling closer to 300 or 400. It's nice because you can take pictures up close, but it has a really good zoom, and so you can still get relatively good pictures of birds locally. You can't get the really far ones, but you can at least get the ones that are relatively close. So Tim, did you have any other thoughts on pictures, or anyone else in the chat? If you have a really good camera, feel free to mention what type it is in the chat.
Well,
I have a Mark, well, I think it's a Mark II, a Canon Mark II R3, but it definitely, if you want to get longer pictures, I also have a Tamron lens, a 150 millimeter to 600 millimeter lens. It can be pricey, but you can learn through experience and get some good pictures. So yeah.
One of the other things is Digiscoping. If you have a scope, you can buy a sort of a coupling mechanism that you could attach your camera to, and you don't necessarily need a telephoto on your camera. You could probably just use your regular lens and focus it through your spotting scope, and that would provide kind of a double use.
So Terrence asked a question. To be honest, I don't necessarily know the answer. We don't know all of the specific locations. There are some that are more established Audubon organizations, so we're more established, we're older. There are quite a few, for instance, the one in Traverse City, that it's established, but they don't, I believe, have any paid employees. They're run by their board. And so it's not uncommon for you to find Audubon organizations throughout the United States, but they may not all have anything more than just some board members. And it's for some cases that they're more of a club than they are more of an organization. And so it just depends on what location you're at. So I don't fully know the answer to if there's one in Marquette, Michigan.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Yeah.
So, but you could do a Google search and type something in to find that out.
Yeah. You're welcome, Terrence.
Sorry, the computer was dying. But yeah, any other questions? If not,
well, I appreciate the opportunity. It's kind of nice to share some of this information that I've been collecting over the years, and it's sort of a little passion of mine. I guess it would have to be if you're spending 36 years as a compiler. So.
Why wasn't your name on that memorable people that are in, how did I phrase that? The volunteer list. If you have 35 years, it's almost as much as everybody else.
I'm sorry,
on that
could you
list.
repeat that?
For the notable volunteers, why wasn't your name on the list?
Well, I didn't want to do too much. Anyhow, I'd rather focus on the volunteers.
Yeah. So I did want to let everyone know we haven't solidified any kind of information, but we are considering possibly looking into offering a volunteer training event for the Christmas bird count later in the fall of 2022, especially as it gets closer. So it'd probably be planned as we get closer to that time frame, but again, the details are not even solidified, but it's something we are considering.
Sounds good.
Yeah, another question. So again, Mackenzie put, could I participate in the Detroit Circle? So I believe at the time the Detroit Circle is relatively full, but not that's not to say that if you reached out to the leader in that location, that sometimes maybe you can join in on a group, because the reality is you could contact us and we can reach out to people, but there's always people that maybe can't volunteer every year. And so you can reach out to us and we can figure that out for you. The next comment was, we are in Louisiana and we have some small Audubon groups that go on field trips. So that's what we're looking for. So that's from Terrence. Okay, so you're currently in Louisiana. So they saw a snowy owl at Whitefish Point. Yeah, that's so cool about Michigan though, is that we're a really major hotspot for the snowy owls in the winter time. So I'm glad you got to see those. Those are always a fun little treat.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Rose said had fun in past years with Tim and Christmas counts. Dawn put Christmas shops don't know what cameras are for birders besides a brand, what numbers identify help with cameras. So we did have a webinar in the past on birding photography, and do you know if they incorporated what cameras could be good options in that? Or?
Unfortunately, I don't.
Okay, so unfortunately it doesn't sound like they mentioned that during that webinar, but if you email us directly, I can send ones that I know of, and I can reach out to other people that I know that have nice cameras and send you that information. And we can try and help you find a good camera. Because yeah, the problem with people that sell those cameras is they don't get it nearly as many people that are into birding, and so lenses can vary, because if you are going to be taking pictures inside, you can use a different lens there. If you're doing distance photos, that makes a difference. But yeah, and so it really does vary. Jill said Audubon National often has good input. And so you could also check out the National Audubon Society webpage, and they might have a list of the good cameras for you. So thank you, Jill.
Cool.
Perfect.
Well, everybody enjoy the winter season. Hopefully we'll get a chance to see some birds coming down from the north, and look forward to spring migration as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. And if you have any questions later, you can always email me and I can forward them on to Tim. So again, thank you so much and have a great day.
Good seeing you all.